The stagecoach kicked up a cloud of dust as it rattled into the small town of Sweetwater, Montana Territory, in late spring 1878, and Amelia Hartford pressed her trembling fingers against the worn leather seat to steady herself for what would be the most terrifying moment of her entire 22 years of life. She had traveled 14 days from Philadelphia to meet a man whose letters promised kindness but whose face remained a mystery. And now, as the wooden wheels ground to a halt outside a dusty general store, she wondered if her desperate decision to become a mail-order bride would be her salvation or her ruin. The driver opened the door and extended a weathered hand to help her down. Amelia smoothed her navy traveling dress, acutely aware of how out of place she looked among the rough frontier buildings that lined the single main street. Her shoes touched the packed earth, and she took a deep breath that filled her lungs with dry mountain air so different from the humid summers back east. "Mrs. Hartford." A deep voice called her name, and she turned to see a tall man approaching with long strides. He was younger than she had imagined from his formal letters, perhaps 28 or 29, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled at the nape of his neck, beneath a worn Stetson. His blue eyes were kind despite the weather lines at their corners. "Yes, I am Amelia Hartford," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "You must be Mr. Thomas Cooper." "Thomas, please." He removed his hat and held it against his chest. Up close, she could see the genuine warmth in his expression, and some of the ice around her heart began to thaw. "Welcome to Sweetwater. I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was long," she admitted, "but I am grateful to be here safely." Thomas gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby. "I have a small ranch about 5 miles out of town. The house is simple but sturdy. I hope it will suit you." As he loaded her 2 trunks into the wagon bed, Amelia studied him discreetly. His letters had been honest about his circumstances. He owned 200 acres and ran about 50 head of cattle with the help of one hired hand. He had lost his parents to fever 3 years prior and had been managing alone since. What his letters had not conveyed was the quiet strength in his movements or the gentleness with which he helped her onto the wagon seat. They rode in awkward silence for the first mile, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the rhythmic clip of the horses' hooves. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, golden grasslands meeting blue sky at a horizon so vast it made Amelia's chest tighten with both fear and wonder. "The mountains are beautiful," she ventured, nodding toward the distant peaks that rose like jagged teeth against the western sky. "They are," Thomas agreed. "I never tire of looking at them. Each season brings different colors." He glanced at her sideways. "Your letters mentioned you were a teacher in Philadelphia." "Yes, at a school for girls. But when my father passed and the debts came due, I could no longer afford my boarding house." She had written these facts in her correspondence, but saying them aloud brought back the shame and fear of those desperate months. "My choices were to find employment as a factory worker or to seek a new life elsewhere." "I am glad you chose elsewhere," Thomas said quietly. "I have been alone too long. A ranch is a lonely place without someone to share it with." The statement was simple but honest, and Amelia appreciated that he did not try to dress up their arrangement with false romance. They were 2 practical people seeking companionship and partnership in a hard land. Perhaps that was enough foundation to build something real. The ranch appeared as they crested a low hill. A single-story house stood beside a barn and several outbuildings, all constructed of rough-hewn timber. A corral held several horses and cattle dotted the surrounding pastures. It was modest but well-maintained, speaking to Thomas's dedication and hard work. "It is not grand," Thomas said, a note of apology in his voice. "It is honest," Amelia replied. "That is worth more than grandeur." He smiled at that, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. As he helped her down from the wagon, his hands were careful around her waist, and he released her as soon as her feet touched ground. The house was dim after the bright sunshine. Thomas opened the shutters to let in light, revealing a main room that served as kitchen and living space, with 2 doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. The furnishings were sparse but functional. Everything was neat except for the kitchen area, where dishes sat unwashed and the remains of what might have been breakfast still sat on a plate. "I apologize for the mess," Thomas said, following her gaze. "Housekeeping has never been my strength." "I can see that," Amelia said, but without judgment. She walked to the kitchen area and examined it with a critical eye. A cast iron stove dominated one wall, and shelves held basic supplies. "I suppose you will want dinner soon." "I can manage something," Thomas said quickly. "You must be tired from the journey. Perhaps you would like to rest first and I can show you around later. Your room is there." He pointed to one of the doors. "It has a window facing east, so you will get morning light." Amelia nodded and moved to retrieve one of her trunks, but Thomas was already carrying both inside despite their weight. He set them in her room and backed out quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the intimate domesticity of entering her private space. "I will be working with the cattle until sunset," he said. "Make yourself at home. Everything here is yours as much as mine now." After he left, Amelia stood in the center of the main room and tried to absorb the reality of her new life. The silence was profound, broken only by the ticking of a clock on the mantel and the distant lowing of cattle. She had expected to feel more fear, but instead, a strange calm settled over her. Thomas seemed to be a good man, and this place, while foreign, held a certain peace. She unpacked one trunk, hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe and placing her mother's silver hairbrush on the simple dresser. Then she returned to the kitchen and rolled up her sleeves. If she was going to live here, she would start by making it properly clean. An hour later, the dishes were washed and put away, the table scrubbed, and the floor swept. Amelia found a piece of salt pork in the cold box and some potatoes in a bin. She had learned basic cooking at the boarding house, though her skills were limited. Still, she thought she could manage a simple meal. She got the stove going after some struggle with the damper, cut up the salt pork, and set it to frying. The potatoes went into the pan after, and she added water to keep them from sticking. While it cooked, she found flour and lard and attempted biscuits, though the dough seemed wrong, too sticky and thick. When Thomas returned as the sun was setting, his face streaked with dust and sweat. He stopped at the door and stared at the set table and the food she had plated. "You did not have to do all this," he said, but there was pleasure in his voice. "Of course I did. We must both eat." She gestured to the chair. "Please sit." He washed at the basin first, scrubbing his hands and face, then sat down somewhat gingerly, as though unaccustomed to such ceremony at mealtime. Amelia sat across from him and watched anxiously as he took his first bite of the pork. His expression was carefully neutral. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and took a drink of water. Then he tried a potato and she saw him struggle slightly. "It is terrible, is it not?" she said quietly. Thomas set down his fork and met her eyes. "It is not terrible," he said diplomatically. "It is just, well, the pork is somewhat quite burnt, and the potatoes are raw in the middle. The biscuits are, I am not certain what happened with the biscuits." Amelia felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. "I cannot cook," she admitted. "I told you in my letters that I was a teacher, not a homemaker. My mother died when I was young, and I lived in boarding houses where meals were provided. I can read Latin and teach penmanship, but I do not know how to make a proper meal." She expected disappointment, perhaps even anger. Instead, Thomas leaned back in his chair and studied her thoughtfully. "Can you learn?" he asked. Yes, I believe so. I can learn anything if properly taught." "Then we will learn together," Thomas said simply. "I have been cooking for myself for 3 years. I can teach you what I know, and we can figure out the rest as we go. I did not marry you expecting a servant. I married you hoping for a partner." The word married hung in the air between them. They had not yet had a ceremony, only signed papers that the territorial judge had prepared based on their correspondence and her agreement to come west. But Thomas spoke of it as a fact, as something already real and binding. "We will learn together always," he continued. "Not just cooking. Everything. This ranch, this life, we will build it together. Does that seem fair?" Amelia felt something tight in her chest loosen. "That seems more than fair. That seems like grace." Thomas smiled that transforming smile again. "Good. Now, let me show you how to fix this meal so we can actually eat something tonight." He stood and gestured for her to join him at the stove. As he explained about testing potato doneness with a fork and adjusting the heat for the meat, Amelia found herself relaxing. His voice was patient, his manner easy. When he stood close to demonstrate the proper way to knead biscuit dough, she was aware of his warmth and the clean scent of him beneath the day's work. They salvaged the meal together, and though it was still far from perfect, they ate with good appetite, talking about the ranch and the work that needed doing. Thomas explained his hope to increase the herd and perhaps plant some crops. Amelia told him about her students in Philadelphia and the books she missed from the small library where she had spent her free hours. "There is no library in Sweetwater," Thomas admitted, "but we get catalogs from back east. You could order books if you like." "I read some, though not as much as I should. It would be nice to have someone to discuss stories with." After dinner, they cleaned the dishes together, and Thomas showed her how to bank the stove for the night. The domesticity of it felt strange and comfortable at once, like putting on new shoes that had already been broken in by someone else. When the work was done, they stood awkwardly in the main room as darkness pressed against the windows. "I will bid you good night," Thomas said formally. "We can ride into town tomorrow to see the minister and make our marriage official if you are agreeable. I know we have only just met in person, but I think it is important to do things properly." "I am agreeable," Amelia said. "And Thomas, thank you for your kindness today. For not being angry about the cooking." "Anger would serve no purpose," he replied. "We are in this together now. Your troubles are mine and mine are yours. That is what partnership means." He retired to his room and Amelia went to hers. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the Montana night and wind in the grass and the distant yip of coyotes. She thought about Thomas's words and about the gentle way he had taught her at the stove. She had come west expecting a transaction, but had found something that felt like the beginning of true companionship. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Amelia woke to the smell of coffee and found Thomas had already started breakfast. Together they made flapjacks, and though hers came out slightly scorched and his slightly raw, they laughed about it and ate them anyway. The ride into Sweetwater took an hour, and Amelia used the time to ask questions about the other ranchers and townspeople. Thomas pointed out landmarks and explained the boundaries of various properties. His knowledge of the land was encyclopedic, born from years of living close to it. The town was busier this morning, with people moving between the general store, saloon, and other establishments. A few curious glances followed them as Thomas helped Amelia down from the wagon. "The new schoolteacher arrived yesterday too," Thomas mentioned. "The town has been growing. We might have enough children for a proper school soon." "Who was teaching before?" Amelia asked. Various people tried. Mrs. Henderson held lessons in her parlor for a while, but her arthritis got too bad. We need someone younger and more educated. He glanced at her meaningfully. If you were interested, I imagine they would welcome you. The idea sparked something in Amelia's chest. She had thought her teaching days were over, but perhaps not. The minister's house stood beside a small whitewashed church. Reverend James was a spare man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. His wife served them tea while Thomas explained their situation. "I am glad to see you making things proper," Reverend James said. "The Lord's smiles on marriages entered with right intention. Miss Hartford, you understand what you are agreeing to." "I do," Amelia said clearly. "I came here of my own free will to build a life with Mr. Cooper." "And you, Thomas, you are prepared to honor and protect this woman as your wife." "I am," Thomas said, and the certainty in his voice made Amelia's breath catch. They spoke the vows there in the minister's parlor with his wife and the new schoolteacher, a young woman named Sarah Collins, as witnesses. Amelia's hand trembled as Thomas slid a simple gold band onto her finger. His hands were steady and warm as they held hers. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend James said, and for a moment, Amelia panicked, realizing they had not yet shared even that basic intimacy. But Thomas leaned in carefully, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips. It was brief and chaste, but Amelia felt it to her toes, a spark of something that promised warmth if tended carefully. After the ceremony, they filed the marriage certificate at the territorial office and stopped at the general store for supplies. Thomas introduced Amelia as his wife to the storekeeper, a rotund man named Mr. Patterson who eyed her with open curiosity. "Welcome to Montana Territory, Mrs. Cooper," Mr. Patterson said. "Your husband is one of our finest cattlemen, honest as the day is long." "Thank you," Amelia said, warmed by the praise of Thomas even as she felt strange being called Mrs. Cooper. They purchased flour, sugar, coffee, and various other staples. Thomas insisted on buying her a length of pretty blue calico, saying she should have at least one new dress to mark the occasion. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. On the ride home, Thomas was quiet, and Amelia wondered what he was thinking. The reality of their marriage was settling over both of them, she suspected, bringing with it questions about sleeping arrangements and expectations. As if reading her mind, Thomas cleared his throat. "I want you to know, Amelia, I will not rush you into anything. You are my wife legally now, but I understand you barely know me. I will continue to sleep in my room and you in yours until such time as you feel comfortable with, well, with closer proximity." Relief and something else, perhaps disappointment, washed through Amelia. "That is very considerate." "I want this marriage to be real," Thomas continued, his eyes on the horses. "Not just on paper, but in truth. However, I believe those things cannot be forced. They must grow naturally like the grass after rain, given time and the right conditions." "That is a wise philosophy," Amelia said softly. "I do not know about wise, but it is the only way I know to approach this. We will learn each other just as we are learning to cook together, with patience and honesty." Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm of life together. Each morning, they rose with the sun and made breakfast side by side. Amelia learned to judge the heat of the stove and the right consistency for biscuit dough. Thomas taught her about cooking times and spices, and she taught him about measurements and planning ahead rather than just throwing things together. Their meals improved steadily. The first successful batch of fluffy biscuits felt like a major victory, and Thomas praised them so effusively that Amelia laughed until tears ran down her face. She learned to fry salt pork without burning it and to make gravy that did not lump. Thomas showed her how to roast a chicken and make a pie crust, skills he had learned from his mother years ago. In return, Amelia organized the household with a teacher's efficiency. She created schedules for cleaning and washing, planned menus days in advance, and brought order to the jumbled pantry shelves. She also began reading aloud in the evenings, working through a collection of Charles Dickens that Thomas owned but had never finished. He would sit in his chair doing small tasks like mending tack while she read, and sometimes she would glance up to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite name. The physical distance between them was carefully maintained, but Amelia found herself increasingly aware of Thomas in small ways. The way his shoulders moved under his shirt when he worked, the sound of his boots on the wooden floor, the rare but devastating smile he gave when something particularly pleased him. She began to understand that attraction was not just about appearance, but about the accumulation of small kindnesses and shared laughter. One afternoon in early July, a storm blew in suddenly from the mountains. Thunder cracked so loudly it rattled the windows, and lightning split the sky in jagged white bolts. Amelia had never experienced a storm of such violence, and when a particularly tremendous crash shook the house, she cried out. Thomas appeared in the doorway of the main room where she had been folding laundry. "Are you all right?" "Yes, I am sorry. I have never heard such thunder. These storms can be fierce," he admitted, moving to check that the shutters were secure. "But the house is solid. We will be safe." Another crash, this one so close it seemed on top of them, and Amelia flinched badly. Without thinking, Thomas crossed the room and put a steadying hand on her shoulder. "It is just noise," he said gently. "The lightning struck somewhere in the north pasture, probably hit a tree." Amelia knew she was being foolish, but she could not stop the trembling. Thomas, after a moment's hesitation, drew her into a loose embrace, one arm around her shoulders. "You are safe," he murmured. "I promise you are safe." She leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his chest and the steady beat of his heart. The storm raged outside, but here in the circle of his arms, she felt sheltered. They stood that way until the worst of the storm passed, and when they finally stepped apart, something between them had shifted. That evening, Thomas asked if she would like him to teach her to ride. "It would be good for you to know how to handle a horse," he explained. "In case of emergency, or if you want to go into town without me." The lessons began the next day. Thomas started her on his gentlest mare, a patient creature named Rosie. He showed Amelia how to approach the horse, how to sit properly in the saddle, how to use reins and legs to communicate. His hands were sure as he adjusted her position, and she found herself hyper-aware of each touch, even through the fabric of her dress. "You are a natural," Thomas said after her third lesson, when she managed a full circuit of the corral without assistance. Pride glowed in his voice, and Amelia flushed with pleasure at the praise. As summer deepened, they worked together on every aspect of ranch life. Thomas taught Amelia about the cattle, how to spot sickness, and when to call for the veterinarian who rode circuit through the territory. She learned to recognize their individual brands, and to keep the records Thomas had always done haphazardly. Her teacher's precision transformed his messy ledgers into neat columns that told the story of the ranch's growth and needs. In turn, Amelia's presence transformed Thomas. He laughed more easily now, and she caught him singing sometimes as he worked. He began taking more care with his appearance, trimming his beard and wearing his better shirts to dinner, even though there were no guests to impress. He told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about his parents and the early days when Indian raids were a real threat, and every season was a gamble. "Do you ever regret staying here?" Amelia asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. You could have gone back east after your parents died, sold the ranch. Never, Thomas said firmly. This land is in my blood. I cannot imagine living any other way despite the hardships. He paused. Do you regret coming here? No, Amelia answered, and realized as she said it that it was absolutely true. In Philadelphia, I was facing a life of drudgery and poverty. Here I am building something that matters, and I am doing it with someone who treats me as an equal. Thomas turned to look at her fully. You are my equal, Amelia. In every way that counts, smarter than me in most things if I am being honest. That is not true, she protested. You have skills and knowledge I could never hope to match. Different knowledge, he conceded. But that just means we balance each other. Like partners should. His hand rested on the porch rail close to hers, and Amelia felt the pull to close that small distance. Before she could lose her courage, she reached out and laid her hand over his. Thomas went very still, then turned his hand to interlock their fingers. They sat that way until full dark, not speaking, just being together under the vast Montana sky. That night marked a new phase in their relationship. They began finding small excuses to touch. A hand at the small of a back, fingers brushing as they passed a plate, Thomas tucking a strand of hair behind Amelia's ear when it escaped her bun. Each touch was a question and an answer, a gradual exploration of the attraction building between them. In August, Thomas's hired hand, a young man named Pete who had been visiting family in Colorado, returned to the ranch. Pete was immediately and openly delighted to find Thomas had married. About time, boss, Pete said with a wide grin. Place was getting downright depressing with just your ugly face around. Mind your manners, Thomas said, but he was smiling. Pete, this is my wife, Amelia. Amelia, Pete Henderson. He is Mrs. Henderson's grandson and one of the best horsemen in the territory, though do not tell him that or his head will swell even bigger. Pete swept off his hat and gave an elaborate bow. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Cooper. Welcome to Montana territory. I hope Thomas here has been treating you proper. Very proper, Amelia assured him, liking the young man immediately. With Pete back to handle more of the daily ranch work, Thomas had more time to spend with Amelia. They took long rides through the property, and he showed her the creek where he fished and the high meadow where wildflowers bloomed in rainbow profusion. They talked endlessly, about everything and nothing, and Amelia found herself falling in love not with dramatic gestures but with quiet moments and shared understanding. One September afternoon, they were working together in the kitchen making preserves from wild berries Thomas had picked. The work was hot and sticky, and Amelia had tied her hair up and rolled her sleeves to her elbows. Thomas kept stealing glances at her, and finally she turned to catch him at it. "What are you looking at?" she asked, amused. "You," he said simply. "You have a bit of berry juice right there." He reached out and wiped a thumb gently across her cheek. His hand lingered and his expression grew serious. "Amelia, these past months have been the happiest of my life." Her heart began to beat faster. "They have been wonderful for me as well." "I know we married for practical reasons," Thomas continued, his voice low. "But what I feel for you now is far from practical. I find myself thinking about you when I am working, wondering what you are doing and if you are happy. I look forward to coming home each day just to see your face. I believe I am falling in love with you." Joy and relief flooded through Amelia in equal measure. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I have been for weeks now, perhaps longer. I did not know how to tell you." Thomas made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh and pulled her into his arms. This kiss was nothing like their chaste wedding kiss. It was deep and searching, full of the weeks of restrained longing. Amelia wound her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the feelings she had been harboring. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I would very much like it if you would move your things into my room," he said. "If you are ready for that." "I am ready," Amelia said. "I have been ready for some time now." That night, their marriage became complete in every sense. Thomas was gentle and patient, and Amelia felt cherished in a way she had never experienced. Afterward, lying in his arms in the bed they would now share, she felt a bone-deep contentment. "I love you," Thomas murmured into her hair. "I will spend the rest of my life being grateful you answered my advertisement." "And I love you," Amelia replied. "I will be grateful always that you were patient enough to let me learn to love you naturally." The months that followed were rich with both work and joy. Amelia took on the position of teacher in Sweetwater, riding into town 3 days a week to instruct a dozen children in reading, arithmetic, and history. She loved the work and came home energized, eager to tell Thomas about her students' progress. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. The fall cattle sale brought a good price, allowing Thomas to invest in improving the property. He hired additional temporary hands to help build a new barn and extend the house, adding a proper parlor and a second bedroom for future needs. Winter arrived with deep snows that sometimes trapped them inside for days at a time. But those days felt less like imprisonment and more like gifts, time stolen from the demands of the world to spend wrapped in each other's company. They read by the fire, made love in the middle of the afternoon, and talked about their dreams for the future. "I would like children," Amelia said one snowy evening, "if we are blessed with them." "I would like that too," Thomas agreed. He was lying with his head in her lap while she absently stroked his hair. "2 or 3 if fortune smiles on us, enough to fill the house with noise and laughter." "You will be a wonderful father," Amelia said with certainty, "patient and kind, just as you have been with me." By spring, Amelia suspected she was pregnant. The confirmation from the doctor in town filled them both with nervous excitement. Thomas became even more protective, insisting she stop riding and trying to limit her work, though Amelia refused to become an invalid. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I will not spend the next 6 months sitting idle." She continued teaching until she began to show prominently, and even then, she kept house and helped with the ranch accounts. Thomas fretted, but he also trusted her to know her own limits. Their daughter was born in November during the first big snow of the season. The labor was long and difficult, and Thomas paced the main room like a caged animal while the doctor and Mrs. Henderson attended Amelia. When the baby's cry finally pierced the night, Thomas burst into the room despite the doctor's protests. Amelia lay exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "It is a girl," she said, her voice hoarse but joyful. "A daughter." Thomas approached almost fearfully and looked down at the small red face barely visible in the blankets. "She is perfect," he breathed. "You are perfect." He kissed Amelia's forehead gently. "Thank you for this gift." They named her Sarah, after Sarah Collins, the schoolteacher who had witnessed their wedding and become a dear friend. Sarah Cooper had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, and she was the light of their lives from her first breath. The first year of parenthood was exhausting and wonderful. Thomas proved to be as patient a father as Amelia had predicted, walking the floor with Sarah when she fussed, changing her nappies without complaint, and singing soft cowboy songs to help her sleep. Amelia watched him with their daughter and fell even more deeply in love with the gentle giant who had become her husband. They settled into their life as a family. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Amelia returned to teaching part-time when Sarah was old enough, bringing the baby with her to school where she slept in a basket while Amelia instructed her pupils. The children adored having a baby in the classroom and competed to help care for her. When Sarah was 2, Amelia became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their son was born on a mild spring day with far less drama than his sister's arrival. They named him James, after Reverend James who had married them. James had his father's dark coloring and his mother's serious disposition from the start. Pete married that same year, bringing his wife Martha to live in a small house Thomas built on the property. Pete became the ranch foreman officially, and the two families became deeply intertwined, sharing meals and celebrations and the work of building lives in the vast Montana territory. The years passed in a blur of activity. Sarah grew into a bright, active child who loved the horses as much as her father did. James was quieter, more studious like his mother, and showed an early talent for numbers that Amelia carefully nurtured. A third child, another daughter they named Emma, arrived when Sarah was 5 and James was 3. Through it all, Thomas and Amelia remained devoted partners. They still cooked together when time allowed, still read aloud in the evenings, still found moments to steal kisses and whispered conversations. The passion of their early years had matured into something deeper and more lasting, a love built on mutual respect, shared labor, and accumulated years of choosing each other every day. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Amelia by arranging for Pete and Martha to watch the children so he could take her on an overnight trip to the mountains. They rode to a high meadow where the wildflowers bloomed just as they had the first time he had shown her that place. They spread blankets and ate the picnic Amelia had prepared. The food was delicious, proof of how far her cooking skills had come from that first disastrous meal. "You remember telling me we would learn together always?" Amelia asked, leaning against Thomas's shoulder as they watched the sun descend toward the western peaks. "I remember," Thomas said. "Best decision I ever made approaching our marriage that way." "We have learned so much," Amelia mused. "How to cook, how to run a ranch, how to be parents. How to love each other through both easy times and hard. And we are not done learning," Thomas added. "Sarah will be ready for more advanced studies soon. You will have to teach me enough that I can help her with lessons. And James wants to learn about breeding cattle. Emma is already asking about everything under the sun." Amelia laughed. "We will learn it all together, just as we always have." Thomas turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I love you, Amelia Cooper. More today than the day we married, more than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow. You took a risk coming here to marry a stranger, and you have made my every dream come true." Tears pricked Amelia's eyes. "And you, Thomas Cooper, showed me what real partnership means. You did not want a servant or even just a wife. You wanted an equal to share your life with, and you have treated me as such from the very first day. I love you beyond what words can express." They made love there in the meadow as the sun set, their passion still strong after a decade of marriage. Afterward, they lay wrapped in blankets and watched the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. "What do you think the children are doing right now?" Amelia wondered aloud. "Driving Pete and Martha to distraction most likely," Thomas said with a chuckle. Emma was planning some elaborate game involving all the barn cats. Sarah was going to teach James to climb the big oak tree. "They are going to be filthy and exhausted by the time we get home," Amelia predicted. "Exactly as children should be," Thomas said contentedly. They returned home the next day to find the children did indeed look like they had been dragged through the barn backward, but they were glowing with happiness. Sarah launched into a detailed description of all their adventures while James added quieter observations, and Emma bounced with excitement. That night, after the children were finally settled in their beds, Thomas and Amelia stood together on the porch and looked out over the ranch. The moonlight silvered the grass and painted long shadows from the barn and outbuildings. "I have been thinking," Thomas said slowly, "about expanding further, buying the adjoining property to the north. Old Mr. Jackson wants to sell and move to town to be near his daughter. That would give us another 100 acres, Amelia calculated. Could we manage that much land?" "With Pete's help and perhaps hiring another hand or two, yes. It would mean we could run twice the cattle, significantly increase our income, provide more security for the children as they grow." Amelia considered. "What does your instinct tell you? That it is the right move?" "But I wanted your thoughts before deciding. We are partners in this, always." "Then I think we should do it," Amelia said. "We have never been afraid of hard work, and the children are old enough now that I can take on more of the ranch management while still teaching." Thomas pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "How did I get so lucky as to find you?" "Luck had nothing to do with it," Amelia said. "You wrote an honest advertisement, I gave an honest answer, and we both chose to work together to build something real. That is not luck. That is intention and effort." They purchased the Jackson property and spent the next year expanding their operations. It was exhausting work but satisfying. Sarah, at 8 years old, began helping seriously with the horses, showing a natural talent for training. James, at 6, was already keeping basic accounts under his mother's guidance. Even little Emma, just 3, was given small chores appropriate to her age. The Cooper Ranch became known throughout the territory for quality cattle and fair dealing. Thomas served on the local council, helping to govern as Sweetwater grew from a small settlement into a proper town. Amelia's school expanded until they had to build a separate building, and she hired Sarah Collins as an assistant teacher. Through all the business and growth, Thomas and Amelia made certain to protect time for their family and their marriage. Sunday dinners were sacred. The entire family gathered around the table for a proper meal. Evenings were for reading and talking, sharing the events of the day. And they still found moments to be alone together, to remember that before they were parents and business partners, they were husband and wife who had fallen in love slowly and surely. When Amelia was 35 and Thomas 41, their 4th child arrived unexpectedly. They had thought their family was complete, but baby Grace proved that life still held surprises. The older children doted on their baby sister, and Thomas joked that he was outnumbered now with 4 daughters, even if he did have 1 son to even things slightly. As the years continued to pass, the Cooper children grew into remarkable young adults. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son when she was 20, a fine young man who Thomas approved of after considerable scrutiny. James went to college in the East to study business and agriculture, planning to return and help run the ranch with modern methods. Emma showed talent for teaching like her mother and began assisting at the school. Grace, the baby, was still young but already showing signs of being the most stubborn and adventurous of the lot. Thomas's hair grayed at the temples, and lines deepened around Amelia's eyes, but their love only grew stronger. They had weathered harsh winters and brutal summers, financial setbacks and personal losses, sickness and accidents. Through it all, they had stood together, just as Thomas had promised that first day when Amelia could not cook, and he had said they would learn together always. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. Sarah and her husband had 3 children of their own now. James had recently married a woman he met back east and would be returning with her soon. Emma was courting the new doctor in town. Even little Grace, now 14, was growing into a thoughtful young woman. The house rang with laughter and noise, and the table groaned under the weight of food, most of it prepared by Amelia and her daughters. Looking at the feast, Thomas caught Amelia's eye and grinned. "Remember when you burned everything and the biscuits could have been used as ammunition?" Amelia laughed. "I do. And remember how patient you were, teaching me the basics." "You learned quickly," Thomas said. "You learn everything quickly. That mind of yours has always amazed me." Later, after the guests had gone home and the children were settled for the night, Thomas and Amelia sat together on the porch in the rocking chairs Thomas had built when Sarah was born. The evening was mild, and the air smelled of sage and the last of the summer wildflowers. 25 years, Amelia said wonderingly. "Half my life I have been your wife." "The best half, I hope," Thomas said. "Undoubtedly the best half. The happiest, most fulfilling, most love-filled years I could have imagined." She reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "When I stepped off that stagecoach in Sweetwater, I was so frightened, but you made me feel safe from the very first day." "I was frightened too," Thomas admitted. "Terrified you would take one look at me and my rough little ranch and want to leave, that I would not be enough for an educated woman from the city." "Oh, Thomas," Amelia squeezed his hand, "you have always been more than enough. You have been everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. An owl hooted in the distance, and cattle lowed softly in the pastures. "You ever think about how different our lives could have been?" Thomas asked. "If you had not answered my advertisement, if I had chosen one of the other letters?" "Sometimes," Amelia admitted. "But I cannot imagine it, not really. This feels like the only possible life for me. You, the children, this ranch. It all feels inevitable, like it was always meant to be this way." "Maybe it was," Thomas said. "Maybe some things are just meant to be and we were lucky enough to find each other. Or maybe we made our own fate," Amelia suggested. "By choosing kindness and patience and to learn together always. We built this life deliberately, brick by brick, day by day." "I like that better," Thomas agreed. "Means we earned it." More years passed, bringing more changes. James and his wife settled on a portion of the ranch and began raising their own family. Emma married the doctor and moved to Sweetwater but visited often. Grace surprised everyone by deciding to attend a women's college back east, her sharp mind and fierce independence making her parents both proud and nervous. Thomas and Amelia gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, though Thomas still rode out most days to check on things. Amelia retired from teaching at 50, feeling it was time for younger energy to guide the school she had helped build. They had more time for each other now, and they treasured it. They took long rides like they had in their early years together. They read extensively, discussing books and ideas. They welcomed grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, their home always open and full of life. On a crisp October afternoon when Thomas was 68 and Amelia was 62, they rode out to the high meadow where he had first taken her so many decades ago. The wildflowers were long past their bloom, but the autumn grass was golden, and the aspens had turned brilliant yellow. They dismounted and stood together at the edge of the meadow, looking down at the ranch spread out below. The house had been expanded multiple times over the years. The barn and outbuildings had multiplied. Cattle dotted the pastures, and they could see tiny figures of Pete's grandchildren playing in the yard. "We built that," Thomas said with quiet pride. "Started with almost nothing and built a legacy." "We built a life," Amelia corrected gently. "The ranch, the family, our love. All of it, piece by piece, learning together always." Thomas turned to her, and in his lined face, Amelia could still see the young man who had met her at the stagecoach, nervous and hopeful and kind. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every moment, every struggle, every joy. All of it exactly the same as long as it was with you." "As would I," Amelia said, tears filling her eyes. "You have been the great love of my life, Thomas Cooper, the great adventure, the great partnership." They kissed there in the golden afternoon light. Two people who had taken a chance on each other 4 decades earlier and built something beautiful and lasting from that first tentative connection. That evening, surrounded by their children and grandchildren at dinner, Thomas stood to make a toast. "To my wife," he said, raising his glass, "who came to Montana not knowing how to cook and learned not just that, but how to run a ranch, raise remarkable children, and teach an entire generation of Sweetwater's youth. Who has been my partner in every sense of the word for 40 years. Who agreed to learn together always and kept that promise every single day. To learning together always," Amelia added, her voice thick with emotion. "The greatest promise we ever made to each other. To learning together always," the family chorused, raising their glasses. Later that night, lying in bed in the room they had shared for most of their marriage, Thomas pulled Amelia close. "I am a lucky man," he murmured into her hair. "We are both lucky," Amelia corrected. "Lucky to have found each other, lucky to have built this life, lucky to still have so much love between us. I love you, Amelia Cooper. And I love you, Thomas Cooper, today, tomorrow, and always." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had for decades, and their dreams were peaceful and full of the richness of a life well lived together. The years continued their inevitable march, but Thomas and Amelia faced them hand in hand. Thomas eventually needed a cane to walk, and Amelia's hands grew gnarled with arthritis. But their minds stayed sharp, and their love for each other never wavered. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by what seemed like half the territory. The ranch had become one of the largest and most successful in Montana. Their children had all built good lives. Their grandchildren were growing into fine young people. Their legacy was secure. But as Thomas said in his anniversary speech, the legacy that mattered most was not the land or the cattle or even the family, though all those things were precious. "The legacy that matters," he said, his voice still strong at 73, "is that we showed what real partnership looks like. We proved that two people from different worlds can build something beautiful together if they approach life with kindness, patience, and the willingness to learn together always. That has been our secret, simple as it sounds. We never stopped learning from each other and never stopped growing together." Amelia wiped away tears as she listened to her husband, still finding new ways to make her fall in love with him after all these years. When it was her turn to speak, she kept it brief. "Everything I know about love I learned from this man. How to be a partner, how to build a life, how to weather storms and celebrate joys. The day I stepped off that stagecoach in Sweetwater was the day my real life began. Thank you, Thomas, for every moment since." The celebration went late into the night, filled with music and dancing and storytelling. Their grandchildren begged for tales of the old days, and Thomas and Amelia obliged, spinning stories of the early years of the ranch, of Amelia's first disastrous attempts at cooking, of harsh winters and beautiful summers, of all the small and large moments that had made up their decades together. As the evening wound down and guests began heading home, Sarah found her parents sitting together on the porch, watching the stars. "You two are an inspiration," she said, kissing both their cheeks. "I hope my marriage can be half as strong as yours." "It can be," Amelia assured her. "Just remember what your father taught me at the beginning. Learn together always. Support each other, be patient with each other, and never stop choosing each other every single day. Best advice there is, Thomas agreed. After Sarah left, Thomas and Amelia sat in companionable silence, holding hands and listening to the night sounds that had been the soundtrack to their life together. 50 years, Thomas said wonderingly. Hard to believe. 50 years and I would still choose you, Amelia said. Every time without hesitation. And I you, Thomas replied. You are still the prettiest woman I have ever seen and the smartest and the best partner a man could ask for. Flatterer, Amelia said, but she was smiling. Truth teller, Thomas corrected. Always have been with you, always will be. They made their way to bed slowly, their movements careful with age but still coordinated from decades of moving together through life. As they settled under the quilts Amelia had made over the years, Thomas pulled her close. I hope we have many more years, he said softly. As do I, Amelia agreed. But however many we have, I am grateful for each one. They did have more years, blessed with health and continued happiness. They watched as their great-grandchildren began to arrive, and the family continued to grow and thrive. They saw Montana Territory achieve statehood in 1889, a momentous occasion they celebrated along with the rest of the community. On their 55th wedding anniversary, a smaller affair with just immediate family, James presented them with a gift. It was a leather-bound book, and when Amelia opened it, she gasped. Inside were letters. The original correspondence between her and Thomas from when they had been arranging her journey west to become his mail-order bride. James had found them in a trunk in the attic and had carefully preserved and bound them. Amelia and Thomas spent that evening reading through the letters, marveling at how formal and careful they had been with each other, how much they had not said in writing that they had later discovered in person. Listen to this, Thomas said, reading from one of his own letters. I am a simple man with a simple life, but I promise to treat you with respect and kindness and to work hard to make a good home for us both. You kept that promise, Amelia said. Every single day you kept that promise. And listen to this, Amelia said, reading from one of her letters. I may not have all the skills of a frontier wife, but I am willing to learn, and I will work hard to be a good partner. You exceeded that promise, Thomas said. You became more than I ever dreamed of. The letters became treasured possessions, passed down through the family as examples of how their great love story had begun, simply and practically, with two people willing to take a chance on each other. As they moved into their 70s, Thomas and Amelia's health began to decline more noticeably. Thomas had a weak spell one winter that frightened everyone, but he rallied, stubborn as always. Amelia's arthritis worsened until writing and cooking became painful, but she adapted, teaching her granddaughters her recipes verbally and dictating letters instead of writing them herself. Through every health scare and limitation, they remained devoted to each other. Thomas would gently massage Amelia's hands when the pain was bad. Amelia would read to Thomas when his eyes grew tired. They napped together in the afternoons, still finding comfort in each other's presence after all the years. On a spring day just after their 60th wedding anniversary, Thomas and Amelia sat together on the porch in the afternoon sunshine. The ranch was alive with activity. It was calving season, and Pete's grandson, who now served as foreman, had everything well in hand. 60 years, Amelia said softly. I am 82 years old, Thomas. I never imagined living so long or being so happy. I am 88, Thomas replied, and every single one of those years has been enriched by your presence. Do you remember our wedding night? Amelia asked. How nervous we both were, Thomas chuckled. I do. I remember lying in my separate room wondering if you would ever grow to care for me. And I was in my room wondering the same thing, Amelia said. How foolish we were to worry. The love was there from the beginning, just waiting to be discovered. We built it, Thomas corrected gently. Day by day, choice by choice. Love is not just something you fall into, it is something you construct with patience and effort and intention. You always were wise, Amelia said. Not wise, just observant. I watched my parents and learned from them. Real love is not the lightning strike, though that can be part of it. Real love is the accumulation of 10,000 small kindnesses and the choice to stay and work through the hard parts. We have certainly had our share of hard parts, Amelia agreed, but we weathered them all. Together, Thomas emphasized, always together. They dozed off in their rocking chairs, hands still clasped between them. That was how their granddaughter found them an hour later. Two old people holding hands in the sunshine, their faces peaceful and content. Thomas passed away quietly in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 90. Amelia, despite being 5 years younger and in better health, followed him within 6 months, as though she could not bear to be separated from him for long. At their joint memorial service, held in the large church Sweetwater had built 15 years earlier, people came from all over the territory to pay respects. The church was packed and many had to stand outside. James, now a distinguished man in his 60s, gave the eulogy for both his parents. My parents taught me what real partnership looks like, he said. They came together as strangers, brought together by practical necessity and the institution of mail-order brides. My mother could not cook, and my father, in his wisdom, said then they would learn together. Always. That promise, those few simple words, became the foundation of their marriage and their life. He paused, overcome with emotion, then continued. They learned together how to cook and keep house. They learned together how to run a ranch. They learned together how to be parents and grandparents. They learned together how to weather tragedy and celebrate triumph. They learned together how to grow old. And in learning together, they built not just a successful ranch and a large family, but a love story that inspired everyone who knew them. My father used to say that real love is not just about the big moments, but about the accumulation of small choices to be kind, to be patient, to listen, and to support. My parents exemplified that truth every day of their 62 years together. They showed us all what it means to truly be partners in life. After the service, as people gathered at the ranch for a meal, stories flowed freely about Thomas and Amelia. Former students of Amelia's talked about her patient teaching and high standards. Neighboring ranchers spoke of Thomas's fairness and integrity in business. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren shared memories of visits to the ranch, of stories told and lessons learned. But the story that was told most often, that seemed to capture something essential about Thomas and Amelia, was the one about their first dinner together. My mother told me this story many times, Sarah said to a group of younger family members. How she tried so hard to cook a good meal and failed spectacularly. The pork was burned, the potatoes were raw, and the biscuits were like rocks. She was so mortified, certain father would be disappointed or angry. But instead, he said they would learn together. Not that he would teach her as though she were a child, or that she needed to figure it out on her own. Together. Always. From that moment, they approached everything in their lives as a joint endeavor. Neither one was the boss or the subordinate. They were equal partners, learning and growing side by side. That is what made their love so strong, Emma added. They never fell into the trap of thinking one of them was better or smarter or more important than the other. They recognized that they each brought different strengths, and that together, they were stronger than either could be alone. As the sun set over the ranch that day, casting long shadows and painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, the family gathered for a final toast. "To Thomas and Amelia Cooper," James said, raising his glass, "who taught us all how to love, how to work, and how to build a life worth living, and to their motto, which I hope we all carry forward in our own lives and marriages: learn together always." "Learn together, always," dozens of voices echoed, and the words floated out over the ranch that Thomas and Amelia had built together, carried on the wind like a prayer and a promise. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations just as Thomas had hoped. But more than the land and the cattle, what endured was the example Thomas and Amelia had set. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren all approached their own marriages and partnerships with the same philosophy that Thomas had articulated that first day when Amelia could not cook. "We will learn together, always." Those words, simple but profound, became a kind of family creed, spoken at weddings and remembered in hard times. They were a reminder that love is not about perfection or about one person having all the answers. Love is about two people choosing to face life together, to learn and grow and adapt together, to support each other through both triumphs and failures. Years later, when James was an old man himself, he had the original letters between his parents published as a small volume. He included their story, pieced together from their own recollections and from family history. The book became treasured not just within the family but throughout Montana and beyond, a testament to what real partnership could look like. The title he chose was simple, taken from his father's words that first night: "Learning Together Always, the story of Thomas and Amelia Cooper." In the introduction, James wrote, "My parents were not perfect people. They made mistakes and had their struggles like any couple. But what set them apart was their fundamental approach to their marriage. They saw themselves as equal partners in a shared endeavor, and they never lost sight of that truth. When faced with challenges, they did not blame each other or compete. They stood side by side and figured out solutions together. That is the legacy they left, and it is one worth passing on." The book sold modestly but steadily for years, finding its way into the hands of young couples and old ones, of people searching for guidance on how to build lasting love in a world that often made it seem impossible. On what would have been Thomas and Amelia's 70th wedding anniversary, the family gathered at the ranch once more, now run by James's son, but still very much the Cooper family home. A new memorial had been erected near the house, a simple stone marker with Thomas and Amelia's names and the dates of their lives. Beneath that was inscribed their motto: "We will learn together always." The family stood around the marker, 4 generations now, from the elderly down to babes in arms. They shared stories and memories, each generation adding its own recollections and interpretations of the legacy Thomas and Amelia had created. As the gathering broke up and people returned to their homes and lives, 2 great-great-grandchildren, newly married and full of the nervous excitement of young love, paused at the memorial. "You think they really learned everything together?" the young woman asked. "Or is that just a romantic story families tell?" her husband considered. "I think it is both. It is romantic, but it is also true. My grandfather told me once that he never saw Thomas and Amelia argue the way some couples do, where they are fighting against each other. They might disagree, might get frustrated, but it was always them versus the problem, never them versus each other." "I want that," the young woman said softly. "I want what they had." "Then we will learn together," her husband said, echoing the words without fully realizing their significance. "Always." And in that moment, in that simple promise made by two young people standing at the grave of two old ones, the legacy of Thomas and Amelia Cooper continued, proving that love built on partnership and patience and the willingness to learn together always truly does last forever.